Hello, Comp 1. You know, one of the things that makes me real excited about being an English teacher at Central Lakes College is that when we teach straightforward composition classes on writing, our dean loves literature to be a very important element in those classes. It gives us things to write about, right? It gives us things to talk about in the classroom. And additionally, at least for me personally, literature is absolutely essential because it's the only consciousness we have, right? As Borges puts it, we're all hungering and thirsting for stories. And I just couldn't be happier again to be in a school where literature is a big deal in all classes. We've arrived also at the part of the semester where most of the teachers at Central Lakes College teaching Comp 1 are inviting their students to craft what are famously called literary analyses. Now, I'm well aware that English classes can be intimidating places to be, and the call for a teacher to come in and say, hey, write a literary analysis, that sounds pretty intimidating. Were I 18 years old, I think I'd be looking up and thinking, hey, you're the English major, you write a literary analysis. Or possibly thinking, wait a minute, I'm a student and you want me to further scholarship on an author or on a book? That's not necessarily the story, but let's start out with just some loose and informal comments about what a literary analysis isn't. I'm going to give you some helpful hints for writing a good one, and near the end I'm going to give you a couple of examples I think that would be good ways to go. So I've got some do's and some don'ts and just some things I want to communicate to you. First, a literary analysis is not a book report. You wrote those when you were little, right? You'd read a book and you'd write some kind of report on it and earn marginal points in whatever grade book the teacher was brandishing before you. It's also not an adventure, an escapade in plot summary. You don't have to spend very much time summarizing a novel for a teacher who's taught it for a quarter century. So don't waste a lot of time doing that. Just do it to the extent that it's helpful. It's also not a general kind of rambling about whether or not you liked or disliked the book. There may be an element of praise, blame in there, but really what it is you making a claim about the novel and then backing it up. We call it a literary analysis because it is an analysis of something written, something literate. And you're going to stay focused on the novel, The Great Gatsby. Well, when I talk about some of these things, I always feel like I'm in school marm mode, like I should have that flowery print dress and the beehive hairdo that I'm always talking about. That's because these things are as old as the hills. You might focus with your literary analysis in a general way on plot, on setting, on the narration or the point of view. You also might take a look at the novel at a metaphoric or a symbolic level. Think too, back to one of those vids that I made that offered you kind of a glimpse at what literary theory is all about. Now, I didn't dumb it down for you, but I tried to sort of go into that body of knowledge and give you what I thought would be useful. I could stand here in one of my most favorite corners of my property and talk to you for quite a while about formalism, structuralism, postmodernism. You don't need to know that. Let's go back to some of those terministic screens that I tried to loan you in that vid that I shot in the basement of the Alcuin Library. You might remember there that I tried to help you understand what Marxist literary theory is. That would not be inappropriate at all when we're talking about The Great Gatsby. You can look into that telling of a tale and say, who's got money? Who's got power and authority because of the money? Who doesn't, right? Who's out of the loop regarding money? It's not an inappropriate way to go. I also loaned you the idea that you can pick up any book or any essay and look at it through the terministic screen or the lens of the feminist literary critic. And I can imagine a paper on that, right? Where anyone, you don't have to be a woman to write that paper, takes a look at how the women in The Great Gatsby are characterized. What is Fitzgerald doing when he typecasts Jordan, Myrtle, Daisy? What is he doing there? Is that a negative characterization or a positive? It doesn't have to be the major characters either. You could go after a minor one, like the secretary of Myra Wolfsheim. But again, the main thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the book, you're going to make a claim, and you're going to back it up using the text. Now, I am a 53-year-old English major that has been reading and talking about The Great Gatsby for years. So what I would do if I were in your spot is probably going to be a different paper than what you would write. You're all going to write different papers, and what you bring to the table is what really matters. But to give you further examples, if I were going to write a paper on The Great Gatsby, I'm really interested in how F. Scott Fitzgerald controls our sympathies, right? I think I could write an entire paper on that, on how he makes us pull for some characters and not pull for others. Would the novel be interesting if Tom were a good guy? No. Fitzgerald vilifies him, right? To make us root for the Great Gatsby. I could see a whole essay on that. I could imagine, too, an essay that takes a look at rhetorical distance, because rhetoricians are obsessed with rhetorical distance. Nick, for instance, is a distant, unaware narrator, right? On the first page, he only uses 12 personal pronouns. He's holding us at a distance. You only get probably go 150 pages into the book before Nick says something along the lines of, I'm looking over these pages that I've written. It's like he forgets he's telling a story for most of the novel. And do you trust him in that distance? There's a point earlier in the novel where he announces that he's the only honest person that he knows. Right about there? I start to doubt everything he says. I also can't imagine writing an essay about the Great Gatsby without talking about the characters. Books are great because there's people in them, just like us, striving and struggling and going through all kinds of things. And I have a particular interest, to go to another theme that we talked about in another vid, about the tensions and the distance and the differences between romanticists, romantic characters, and realistic characters. There's absolutely no doubt that Nick sees the world as it is, straightforwardly. And Gatsby is a dreamer. And in literature, the dreamer gets it every time. Dreamers are always punished. I can imagine an entire essay on that. Now, I've got a couple helpful hints here regarding the paper. If these are insufficient, call me or write me with any concerns that you have about the paper. One of you, whose name starts with an S, has already written a couple of very professional emails about this. So too, as a young man whose name starts with D. I'm really grateful for that. Questions make me feel like a teacher. But maybe this will get some of you going. Item 1. I have sent you, or posted on our D2L news item, the web address of an extraordinary resource for writers, which is famously called OWL. OWL is the writing lab for Purdue University, and every English major in the world who's teaching English steers their students towards it. On the page of our news for our D2L, I've put up an address that will take you to a 14 slide presentation, 14 screen slide presentation rather, on how to write a literary analysis. You might find some useful things there. So load that into your browser and go check that out. Item 2, stay away from the internet. Essays like this can encourage plagiarism, and I know what it smells like, at least some of the time. You don't need other people to help you with this essay. I want to know what you think. Number 3, focus on the text of The Great Gatsby. One of the rules of English majors are if it's not in the text, it doesn't exist. And yeah, we get up every day to break that rule, but really focus on the text. Part 4 here, point 4. This assignment is a little bit of a warm-up for Comp 2, where you are definitely going to be writing about sources. Here, you're writing about one source. It's called The Great Gatsby. So what I would do if I were you, and I won't mark you down if you don't, create a work cited page. It's dead simple. Create a citation, a bibliographic entry for The Great Gatsby. It will run like this. Outdent the first line. Fitzgerald, comma, F. Scott, period, 2 spaces. The Great Gatsby, title, underlined, period, 2 spaces. Place of publication, colon, publisher, comma, year, period. Bam, that's it. And then from within the novel, if you ever want to point to it, which is basically what you're doing when you're writing about a book, sort of tell me where that page comes from with a parenthetical insertion at the end of the sentence. If you quote, for instance, the passage where Nick Carraway turns to Great Gatsby and says, Jay Gatsby, and says, "You can't bring back the past." And Gatsby says, "Of course you can, old sport." If you want to quote that, show that to me. Remind me of it. And if it occurs on page 100, at the end of the sentence where you quote, simply put page 100 in a parenthetical insertion, and then I'll know that that's where you're directing me. I think the last hint I have for you, and this is not easy, try to write about this novel in present tense. Intellectually, this takes a little bit of a trick. I think we've already talked about this in another vid. You read a novel, you set it down, and it's a past experience. And you want to write about it in past tense. But then a couple things happen. You lapse into passive constructions, and the reader has to spend all of his time remembering with you. Try to think of The Great Gatsby as a novel that's always happening. Myrtle is always going after Tom with that puppy. Jay Gatsby is always waiting outside the window of Daisy. And Nick Carraway is always wondering what the heck is going on over at the neighbor's house. Keep the verbs present tense. Have some fun. Write this puppy in the next 3 or 4 days. and give me a call or write me if you have any complications. It's not that big a deal. It's a literary analysis. You're going to analyze something literary, make a claim, back it up, and you'll be there. Have fun.